Rain hammered down on the quiet edge of the small town as Ethan Cole drove through the mist-covered road, headlights slicing through sheets of water. His life had grown hollow since the accident that took his wife, and silence had become his worst enemy. That evening, seeking company, he spotted a hand-painted sign that read, "Hillcrest Animal Shelter, Open." The shelter was old and nearly falling apart. Wooden boards creaked under his steps, and the smell of wet straw filled the air. Inside, cages stood empty, doors half open, except for one at the far end. Inside it sat a black dog, motionless, its fur dull and soaked, eyes reflecting the pale yellow light of a single hanging bulb. The nameplate read simply, Max. Ethan crouched beside the cage and whispered, "Hey, buddy." The dog didn't move, didn't blink, only stared, calm but uncomfortably aware. The shelter's caretaker, an elderly man in a raincoat, appeared from the shadows and said quietly, "That one's been here for years. No one keeps him long. He always finds his way back." Ethan frowned. "Back from where?" The man hesitated. "From wherever he goes when he disappears." Ignoring the warning, Ethan filled out the adoption papers. The caretaker didn't smile. He just handed over the leash with trembling hands and muttered, "If he starts scratching at night, don't open the door." Outside, the storm had calmed. Ethan walked toward his car with Max following silently. The streetlight flickered overhead, casting the dog's shadow long and twisted across the wet ground. For the first time in months, Ethan felt something like peace, a quiet companionship. But as he opened the car door, Max turned his head toward the dark forest behind them, ears pricked, staring into the blackness as if someone or something had just whispered his name. The rain had stopped by the time Ethan reached home. His small countryside house sat on the outskirts, surrounded by old maple trees that whispered in the wind. He carried Max inside, shaking off the chill, and laid a bowl of food beside the fireplace. The dog didn't move, didn't sniff, didn't even blink. Ethan thought perhaps Max was nervous, adjusting to a new place. "You'll eat when you're ready," he said softly. But as the hours passed, the silence in the house grew heavy, almost too heavy. Around midnight, Ethan woke to a faint scratching sound. It was soft at first, almost delicate, like nails brushing against wood. Then it spread scratch, scratch, scratch from inside the walls. He sat up, listening. The sound moved down the hallway toward his room. When he finally gathered the courage to open the door, Max was sitting there, staring at him from the floor. Muddy paw prints trailed behind him, but they led from inside the bedroom to the hallway. Ethan's throat went dry. He glanced at the window. It was locked from the inside. No one could have entered. And yet, there was dirt on the carpet. He whispered, "Max, how did you?" The dog tilted its head, eyes gleaming faintly red in the dark. A cold draft slipped through the room even though all windows were shut. The next morning, sunlight broke through the blinds. The food bowl was empty now, but the food itself looked untouched, as though it had simply evaporated. Ethan checked the yard, but there were no paw prints outside. Only one faint trail of muddy marks led toward the attic door. He sighed and muttered, "Guess you're just a strange one, huh, Max?" But as he turned away, the attic door creaked open slowly on its own. Days passed quietly, though Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that the house had grown different, colder somehow. At night, Max would sit for hours near the hallway, facing the attic stairs, staring at something Ethan couldn't see. Sometimes, when he passed by, Ethan could hear faint footsteps above, followed by a soft thump, like something being dragged. One rainy afternoon, he decided to finally clean out the attic. Maybe the noises came from loose boards or an animal nest. The air grew colder as he climbed the creaky steps, flashlight in hand. Dust danced in the beam of light, and the smell of mildew filled the space. In the far corner, he found an old wooden trunk. Inside were brittle papers, children's toys, and a faded photograph, a family of 4 standing in front of the same house, but much younger. Next to them sat a black dog. Ethan froze. The dog looked exactly like Max, same white patch on its chest, same calm stare. He turned the photo over. Written on the back, in trembling handwriting, were the words, "He came back after we buried him." A chill ran down his spine. Just then, Max's bark echoed from below, deep, echoing, but somehow distant. Ethan quickly descended the stairs, heart pounding. At the bottom, Max stood motionless by the doorway, eyes fixed on Ethan's hands. The flashlight flickered. Ethan looked down. The photograph was gone. "Max, what's going on here?" he whispered. The dog slowly walked to the stairs, turned its head toward the attic, then looked back at Ethan as if waiting for him to follow. But Ethan didn't move. He just stared, because behind Max, on the wall, was a faint, wet handprint. It was human-sized. And it was fresh. "4. The neighbor's warning, 335 words. The following morning dawned gray and silent, the kind of cold calm that hangs in the air after days of rain. Ethan sat on his porch, sipping coffee, watching Max wander the yard. The dog never barked, never chased birds, never acted alive. It only moved when Ethan did, following him like a shadow. As he was lost in thought, the sound of a walking stick tapping against the pavement broke the quiet. Mrs. Dyer, his elderly next-door neighbor, approached slowly. She had lived on that street since the 1960s and was known for knowing everything about everyone. Her face turned pale when her eyes fell on Max. She froze mid-step, clutching her scarf. Where did you get that dog?" she asked, voice trembling. Ethan smiled faintly. "Adopted him last week. From Hillcrest Shelter." "Why?" Mrs. Dyer's lips quivered. "That's Henry's dog, from the old house fire." Ethan frowned. "Fire?" She nodded. 40 years ago. The house across the road burned down. They said Henry died trying to save his dog. When they found them, both were gone. A week later, neighbors swore they saw the same black dog wandering the street, eyes glowing red in the dark. No one ever caught him. He just kept returning. Ethan laughed nervously. "That's just a story." Mrs. Dyer shook her head. "Maybe. But when I see him," she pointed a trembling finger at Max, who was now sitting perfectly still, staring at her with unblinking eyes. "I feel that night again. The smoke. The screams." Ethan turned to look at Max, but the dog was gone. Vanished silently, leaving only a faint trail of muddy paw prints leading toward the forest. Mrs. Dyer whispered, "He only follows those who remind him of his master." Ethan's voice dropped. "And what happens then?" She looked at him sadly. "Then he never leaves." That night, the wind howled through the trees like distant voices calling his name. Ethan sat in the living room, staring at the flickering glow of the television, though he wasn't really watching. Max hadn't come inside since evening. For the first time, Ethan felt uneasy, not because the dog was gone, but because the silence that followed felt too deliberate. Around 2 a.m., a low growl echoed from the backyard. Ethan froze. The sound wasn't threatening, it was mournful, almost human. He grabbed his phone and opened the live feed from his outdoor camera. The screen showed Max in the garden, digging furiously in the wet soil near the old maple tree. His movements were jerky, unnatural, as if something else was guiding him. Then he stopped, head jerking toward the camera, eyes glowing bright crimson for a single frame before the screen glitched. Ethan's chest tightened. He went outside with a flashlight, the cold air biting through his clothes. The smell of wet earth filled the air. He followed the paw prints until he reached the freshly disturbed patch of ground. Kneeling, he brushed away the loose soil and found a small charred metal tag buried there. It read, Max, 1978. The beam of light trembled in his hand. Behind him, the soft sound of footsteps in mud. He turned slowly. Max stood a few feet away, tail low, fur dripping, eyes burning faint red. But when Ethan looked closer, the dog's face seemed to shift. A man's face flickered beneath the fur for a fraction of a second, mouth moving soundlessly. Henry, Ethan whispered. A deep, layered growl answered, one voice canine, the other unmistakably human. The wind surged, the trees bent, and the flashlight flickered out. The last thing Ethan heard before darkness swallowed him was the sound of digging right beside his feet. Ethan didn't sleep that night. When dawn broke, the house was eerily quiet, no birds outside, no sound of wind through the trees. Only stillness. Max was gone again. The muddy patch in the yard was covered as if no one had ever touched it. Yet, Ethan's shoes were still caked with dirt, and the collar tag Max 1978 sat heavy on his kitchen table. Determined to understand, he began searching through old town records online. Every lead brought up fragments of a tragedy. In 1978, a man named Henry Wallace had lost his family in a house fire. He was found dead days later in his basement, beside the burnt body of his dog Max. But rumors claimed Henry had been obsessed with an occult ritual, one meant to preserve companionship beyond death. Among the archived photos, Ethan found one that made his heart pound, a picture of Henry. The resemblance was uncanny. The same sharp jawline, same eyes. It was as if he was staring at himself. Suddenly, a low whimper echoed from the hallway. He turned. Max stood there, soaked in rain, though the weather outside was clear. Ethan whispered, "What are you?" The dog stepped closer, eyes glowing faintly. A voice, soft, broken, human, whispered, "Don't stop loving me." Ethan stumbled back. No, that's impossible. He found the ritual page in the archive notes. The text read, "Feed him affection, or he'll feed on fear." The air grew heavy, suffocating. Lights flickered. The dog's shadow stretched across the wall, taller, human-shaped. Ethan's heartbeat thundered as whispers filled the room, 100 overlapping voices repeating his name. He clutched the tag, tears in his eyes. "Henry, what did you do?" A cold breeze passed through him, and a whisper answered, "What you're doing now." Morning sunlight filtered weakly through the curtains, pale and colorless. Ethan sat motionless in his living room, the collar tag still clenched in his hand. Max lay at his feet, silent as ever, eyes half closed. The night's events felt unreal, voices, shadows, the whisper that sounded too human to dismiss. He whispered, almost to himself, "I'm not Henry. I'm not." The dog lifted its head, ears twitching. Then, slowly, it placed a paw on Ethan's knee, a strangely human gesture. For the first time, Ethan didn't pull away. Instead, he smiled weakly, whispering, "You just want to be loved, don't you?" The room fell utterly silent. A faint hum vibrated through the air, like electricity under the skin. The temperature dropped sharply. The lights flickered once, then steadied. Outside, Mrs. Dyer watched through her window. She saw Ethan sitting on his porch, smiling, the black dog beside him wagging its tail gently. She sighed in relief, perhaps the poor man had found peace. But when she glanced again, her expression froze. In the reflection of Ethan's window, there was no dog. Only Ethan, sitting alone, smiling at nothing. She rushed to his house, calling his name. The front door creaked open slowly. Ethan sat in the same position, eyes distant, smile frozen. His skin was pale, lips colorless. The collar tag on the table no longer said Max 1978. It now read, Ethan 2025. Mrs. Dyer stumbled back, trembling. The faint sound of scratching came from beneath the floorboards, slow, rhythmic, almost like breathing. Later, when the police arrived, they found no dog, no footprints, and no sign of struggle. Just that same tag, glinting faintly in the morning light. Down the empty street, a black dog trotted silently through the mist, eyes glowing faint red, heading toward the Hillcrest Animal Shelter. Waiting for the next lonely soul.